Good chat. All right, well, welcome everybody to Lunch Without Lunch with Rainforest Alberta. If this is your first time joining us, a very warm welcome. Please feel free to share your information in the chat, and you'll have some time to connect with others in breakout rooms about halfway through the hour. So the way the hour is spent is we'll do a little intro to share what the rainforest is all about. If anyone would like to share in the chat what it means to them, please feel free. And then we will have a guest speaker share their story with us today, and then we'll head into breakout rooms. Making me dizzy, Amber. No, just kidding.
I'm sorry, I forgot to turn the sound on.
I'm just teasing you. Community manager for Rainforest Alberta in Calgary, and we have Amber Rowden, our community storyteller, and our friends from Rainforest in Edmonton, who are hosting their annual summit in person tomorrow. James Kierstead is here and will share with us in just a sec. But before we get started, I will just make a mention of the unceded and traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda Nations, and the Métis Nation Region 3, and all of the people who make their homes upon Treaty 7. And for those in the Edmonton area, we'd like to make special acknowledgement of the traditional lands of the Treaty 6 territory, the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, as well as the Métis. And if you find yourself on other sacred gathering places today, please feel free to share that information in the chat and acknowledge those lands as well. So I'll turn it over to James for an intro to the rainforest.
Hi, everyone. James Kierstead. I'm a serial entrepreneur and head up the steering committee here in Edmonton for the rainforest. My business 11 is in the business of making homes more affordable to build, purchase, and operate. And to just real quick before I jump into everything, to go back to the comment of coming out of Calgary and having a hot dog after being in the bars. My first business that kind of went really big was the hot tub business. And back then, people thought I was in the hot dog business. So there you go. Little twist, but not quite the same. Anyway, welcome everyone. Super happy to have you all here today. If we can go to the next slide, Amber. We got our little video to show about the rainforest, and then I'll finish us off.
What does it take to realize an idea, or for a seed to sprout? At Rainforest Alberta, we know the answer is rooted in trust. Traditionally, Albertans have cultivated their ideas in established systems. Inputs that don't fit these systems are weeded out. Opportunities for growth are missed. But now, Albertans want a dynamic landscape that can evolve organically, like a rainforest. At Rainforest Alberta, we believe a culture of trust is the fertile soil where ideas grow. Our budding innovation ecosystem is a network of relationships pulling each other up as they push forward in their own field. Trust breaks down barriers. An open, inclusive network increases collaborative innovation. Successful breakthroughs inspire new ideas. A cycle begins. Rainforest Alberta is a movement to amplify trust by cultivating honesty, inclusion, and accountability. How? Our social contract holds us accountable to demonstrate trust across the province. We meet to have honest conversations around collaboration. This leads to more inclusive spaces for everyone to fearlessly build new ideas together. By raising the standard of trust, Alberta's ideas, talent, and resources can be evergreen. Visit rainforestab.ca to sign the social contract and start growing together.
Thank you, Amber. So we use the 6 pillars to guide us and our conversations and actions. Not all are weighted equally. Like any ecosystem, we have to find the right balance. And they're measured through the scorecard assessment, which we do every year. I think you guys just did yours in Calgary not too long ago. And that balance, if we want sustainability, we need to build that culture and additional leaders. But we also need to have the resources and engaged activities, policy and infrastructure, and the right role models. So tips for making lunch without lunch better. First, introduce yourself in the chat. What are you working on? What are you looking for? What can you offer? Please also share that in the chat. Don't be afraid to connect with individuals through DM. No one's going to bite here. Put on your camera. I know these are virtual, but hey, if we can see each other, we can at least get some connectivity happening. And then keep connecting on the Rainforest Slack workspace. Check out the lunch notes for capture of today's chat. And there are also Lunch Without Lunch recordings posted on YouTube every week. And today, oh, Bridget, do you want to handle this? You go right ahead.
Oh, yeah, either or, James. Sure, I can hop in. So each week we're highlighting a value of the social contract, and this week we will focus on sharing. So I will open myself to learning from others. We need an S there. I am eager to act, to learn. I will share my knowledge in the spirit of the Creative Commons to help nurture learning in others. And so we ask that you share in the chat how sharing is part of your work and your daily life working in the innovation sector. So we will get into our session for today. Just before we do, though, I'll just make a quick mention in case we run out of time or I forget at the end of the hour. We do have community announcements, but I will make a special announcement now that Lunch Without Lunch next week will be hybrid. It'll be the first time we come back together in 2 years in Calgary for Lunch Without Lunch in person at the Platform Innovation Center. We'll have 8-Bit Cortex sharing their founder story on the pitch stage there and then mingling in the main level. There's parking in the building and it's also very close to the C train station. So the new Innovation Center there, you'll have a chance to check it out. If you are not comfortable coming in person, that is totally cool. Or if you're in another part of the world or province, you can join us still virtually. It might be a little clunky. We'll see how we do. We'll be testing out some new tech at Platform and whatnot. And if all else fails, we'll just have someone on the Zoom call the whole time so we can navigate things that way. So really looking forward to seeing everyone in person or anyone who can in person next week. But what I absolutely love about our virtual format, and just so it's clear, we're just testing that out next week. And then we'll see how, you know, the attendance is. And if it's like, feels like something people are ready to get back into, we'll maybe look at doing that once a month, the last Wednesday of every month. We'll see how that goes. So just stay tuned to our socials. Otherwise, this Zoom link will always be open Wednesdays at noon. So what I was going to say was what we really love about this virtual setting is we can come together across the province and even beyond. We've had people from all over the world join us for Lunch Without Lunch, which has been incredible. Today, our speaker comes from a BC-based geospatial company, and Jesse, you can give a wave. Jesse Mauch, he has been joining us at Rainforest for much, I don't know how long, Jesse, you can tell us, but he reached out and said, can we talk about geospatial at Lunch Without Lunch? And we said, absolutely, please school me on what geospatial even is. So we look forward to hearing from him today. Of course, as always, there's time for Q&A. I'll ask everybody, if you're the type of person who likes to speak up, you're an extrovert like myself, and you like to often ask questions, there's a program I took called Strategic Doing, which talks about equity of voice. And it asks that people who speak up often to maybe more pay attention to kind of, you know, speaking up maybe more than you need to. And those who don't speak up to have the courage to please unmute, put their hand up and share their question. So I'll ask everybody to just keep that top of mind today so that we can hear from various voices in the room. And of course, we'll all have a chance to chat in the breakouts once we're done the presentation. So with that, Jesse, I'm going to turn it over to you. Really looking forward to hearing all about Sparkgeo and their work across the country.
Thank you very much, Bridget. Can everyone hear me? I'm coming through. All right. Okay, excellent. All right, I will share my screen. So, am I going to get, there we go. Yeah, welcome everyone. So my name is Jesse Mauch. I'm a registered geomatics engineer with APEGA, recent MBA grad, and from the Haskayne School of Business. specializing in entrepreneurship and innovation. That's kind of what got me interested in rainforest. And to answer Bridget's question, I've been coming for almost a year now. I'd say it's probably maybe April, May will actually be a year. So pretty close. So what I kind of wanted to talk about today is this idea of what geospatial technology is, what are some of the sort of trends happening around this space, and then how Sparkgeo has managed to be successful in this environment. I think this is relevant to our group because one, geospatial technology crosses a lot of different industries. So there's a reasonably good chance that one of your organizations uses geospatial technology in some way, and so it may be relevant to your business, as well as, you know, sort of this startup company. We've been around for about 12 years now. There's probably a lot of lessons that you could draw from our organization on how we were able to be successful in this high-tech space. So I guess to start with, I have to maybe define my terms here of what exactly is geospatial technology. So it has to do with data relating to locations on Earth, right? So geospatial doesn't apply to maybe what happens in Mars, or as we're doing astrophysics. It's really concerned about data that has some location associated with it. And it covers, how we collect that data, how do we process it, how do we analyze it, how do we store it, how do we display it and visualize it. Covers that full spectrum of how we deal with data that has a location associated with it. So to kind of boil it all down to one word, it's basically about maps. And so here we can see, a nice example. This is from a project that we've been working on, looking at the impacts that forest fires have on soil erosion. So this is kind of a map of the West Road watershed. So that a watershed is kind of where, if you imagine a map and you have rainfall, water, obviously tends to collect at some point and it forms watersheds. So within this sort of area, any water that falls there stays within this area until it flows out to some other region. And then the red is showing where there was some forest fires in 2017, right? So this is the type of things that we create in a geospatial context. There's lots of other terms that get thrown around in the industry. So geomatics, which is kind of what my designation is about, kind of tends to follow more from like an engineering perspective. You'll probably hear the term geography quite a bit. So kind of how we describe different types of land cover. Cartography is specifically about the art of actually making maps. Geodesy revolves around how we understand the shape of the Earth. So that's where this image comes from. It's called the geoid. So it describes the equipotential surface of gravity on Earth. So it's kind of this lumpy globe of like where gravity is always equal. Geoinformatics, this kind of maybe comes a bit more from the comm sci perspective of, just thinking about information sciences more generally, and then maybe how that applies to a geospatial context. And then surveying, and not like what's your favorite, donut, but like surveying as in like a land surveyor where you go out and measure the land in some way. In terms of describing the technologies of geospatial, it's a pretty broad industry, but I wanted to break things out into 4 buckets that I could maybe discuss here. So we've got imagery, terrain, positioning, and mapping that I want to go through as sort of these broad categories. I think with that, I'll kind of help see some of the trends that are happening here. So in terms of how we've traditionally collected imagery for the Earth, it's usually done from plane or with a satellite. And in fact, that's what we see here. This is a picture of, Washington, D.C. You can see the White House in there. And we take these images from space. And that's where a lot of imagery for geospatial typically comes from. What we're seeing now is a lot of UAV work being done. So we're actually taking, we have we're putting cameras on drones now and using that as geospatial imagery. We're actually starting to use a lot more terrestrial imagery. I know it's a revolutionary idea to take pictures from the ground, but for the geospatial industry, this is actually relatively new for us to be able to take ground-based imagery and use that to extract more location-based information from. We're also seeing a huge explosion of what are known as cube satellites. So, typical satellites like what Maxar uses are these, big satellites. They cost multi-millions of dollars to put up in space. And there's, traditionally maybe like 50 or so of these types of satellites up in total. Now we have companies like Planet Labs and Satellogic that are launching like hundreds of satellites at a time. And they're small satellites with relatively inexpensive cameras on them. But rather than capturing a few pictures a day, they're mapping the entire planet every day with imagery. Another trend that we're seeing here is this move to what's known as hyperspectral. So as you probably more or less know, we see in 3 color bands, red, blue, and green, and most of our imagery is captured in red, blue, and green. Satellite imagery often has a couple more bands. They want to see stuff in infrared. And so we've typically had like 5 to 8 band imagery from satellites, but now we're getting hyperspectral imagery, which is kind of like putting a spectrometer on a satellite. And now we see hundreds of bands of data. And this allows us to do that chemical analysis that you would often see in sort of chemistry spectrometry. So we can now basically do that from space. And this allows us to see things like greenhouse gases and more specialized detection. So the overall trend here is just like this huge increase in frequency of imagery. Rather than seeing a picture every couple of years, we're now seeing images of a location every day. We're seeing much higher resolution imagery. So typically you would maybe get an image where a pixel was a couple of meters, even hundreds of kilometers. But now with stuff like UAVs and terrestrial imagery, we're getting down to centimeters for that resolution. So very high quality imagery. And with the advent of a lot of more machine learning and AI, a lot of these companies are having to do a lot more processing on their data so that it's ready for these AI and machine learning applications. Kind of, we would say, is normalizing the data so it's usable by these types of algorithms. The next sort of bucket here is on terrain. So I guess here there's a really popular technology in our sector is known as LiDAR. So there's light detection and ranging. And that's actually what this image here is showing, again, of the White House, where you can kind of see in the image there, like all these individual points. And basically what's happening is like this laser scanner that's scanning the ground around. And sorry, I'm just gonna, I can't close the poll. Where is that now? Well, I guess I'll just try and carry on. Maybe, can you close that, Bridget? Or can I? Oh, okay, there we go. So that's one way that we've traditionally collected this sort of terrain data around the Earth. Another one is called INSAR. This is synthetic aperture radar. Very similar idea to just traditional radar that you would see, like in an air traffic control, but now we're doing it with a satellite and we're trying to create a terrain of the ground from it. And then again, traditional sort of survey methodologies to sort of capture information about the terrain. In terms of what we're doing now, again, we're seeing UAVs being very popular in this space. Mobile phones are actually becoming really popular. If you've got the newest iPhone, it actually has a LiDAR sensor in it so that you can scan the environment around you and create a model of this environment. We're seeing LiDAR being deployed in vehicles. And then there's also this idea of FODAR. So before I was telling you we have imagery, right, and with cameras, and we can create a map of that. Well, with enough imagery, we can actually recreate the terrain from the images. based on having multiple angles of that imagery. And so it's something we're starting to see becoming really popular now, because taking pictures is a lot cheaper than LiDAR traditionally. And so where the trend here is that LiDAR is becoming really cheap. We're going from units that cost $500,000 to put on a plane down to units that are maybe only a few $1,000s that can be put onto a UAV or into a vehicle. And with the advent of autonomous vehicles, there's a lot of mapping going on to create these we call high definition mappings of environments so that they can use those maps to train the autonomous vehicle controls. A lot of this LiDAR technology is then being used for augmented reality. That's kind of why I think Apple put a LiDAR unit in the phone, is to enable that augmented reality. In terms of the work that we do, there's a lot of cloud optimization. These are really big data sets. And so it's hard to share that data with other people. So there's a lot of work going into how do we make this data accessible to other organizations and make it digestible. And so, yeah, one of the big trends here is just seeing that cost just absolutely plummet for the types of sensors involved. Next is around positioning. So this is how we know where we are on the Earth. Again, traditionally surveying applications here, this technology being used in aviation with GPS satellites and INS, which stands for an inertial navigation system. So you can think of gyroscopes, accelerometers, that sort of stuff. They go in to make an INS unit. But traditionally, this was very limited to those two sectors, mainly very heavy industrial sort of stuff. What we're seeing now is a lot more constellations. So it's not just GPS, but Russia for a while has had their own system called GLONASS. The Europeans Space Agency has been putting up Galileo for quite a while. We're even seeing some like China, India, and Japan have been putting up these positioning satellites specifically to service their part of the world. And these sorts of IMUs that, again, were hundreds of thousands on a plane are now in our phones as well. So we're seeing mobile devices that basically have this sort of positioning technology that traditionally may have been like $50,000 to $100,000 to acquire. And so the trend here that we're seeing is that a lot of these sort of positioning technologies are ending up in that Internet of Things environment and then feeding into smart cities and smart grids. Because one of the interesting things that about GPS is we usually think about it, it tells us where we are on Earth, but it also is a really good clock. All those satellites have atomic clocks on them, and they're constantly broadcasting what time it is. So if I believe it's Seiko has, and there's a few other companies that have satellite or radio watches where they're just taking the GPS signal and syncing up your watch to that GPS signal. So it's always like as accurate as an atomic clock. And so utilities and other networks often use GPS just for that timing component. And so what we kind of see here with this map, and what I'm trying to illustrate too, is this real-time telemetry component. So this is a data product created by Mapbox called Movement, and they aggregate all this sort of mobile positioning information being collected by Facebook and Google and everyone else, and they anonymize that data. And they come up with these metrics of movement activity relative to some baseline. In this case, we're showing it relative to counties in the US. And you can sort of see how activity, movement activity changes over time at various locations. And particularly in the case of the last couple of years, how people are moving in with respect to COVID. Lastly, we have mapping. So again, traditionally, this is very desktop oriented. People who are dedicated professionals, the cartographers, people like myself, working in what's called a GIS, it's a Geographic Information Systems, or CAD, so it's your drafting software. And a lot of this is done very manually. There may be some scripted processes that get you from A to B, but it's very, very sort of tailored approach. Now, the trend is we're seeing a lot more cloud-based applications. We're seeing these sort of web-based automated products and a lot of push towards standardizing the data in this sector so that it becomes more usable across more platforms and it can be more easily integrated into everyday processes. And so this is, again, feeding this real-time data feeds like we saw on the last slide. It's making this data more accessible to computer vision and that machine learning, AI sort of stuff. And that's what we see in this image here is a computer vision software that's identifying various objects in the image. And personally for Sparkgeo, we've actually been doing a lot of work around web map accessibility. So understanding and trying to create mapping products that are accessible to people with low vision, well, particularly low vision, because that's where maps are a very visual product. And how do we provide this data to people who would struggle to see? So that's my very quick overview of geospatial technology. And I'll open it up to questions, I guess, about that as we want. But I want to kind of get into, I guess, a little bit into Sparkgeo and what we do. So we're a geospatial software consultancy. We're technically based out of Prince George, BC, founded in 2010 by Will Carter-Dell. He's the gentleman on the far right there. And we're really focused on this, open source cloud architecture solutions within geospatial. And so we do a lot of consulting with large tech companies traditionally. In fact, here's some of our major clients. So I personally do a lot of work with Bayer Crop Sciences, done some work with Microsoft Planetary Computers. Maxar is a major satellite company. Mapbox, kind of produces some of those maps that we saw earlier. Then we have some sort of maybe odd ones like Arturo, insurance. We've got Rainplan, who's doing a stormwater startup. The Wildlife Conservation Society, they've got a product called Mermaid that does coral reef monitoring, hence also a partnership with Island Coral Reef. And then we've got this product called Maptics, which is kind of creating, it's meant to sort of be a tracker on how people are using a company's map. So if you have a map on your website and you kind of want to understand how people are interacting with that map, Maptics is a product that kind of helps you understand how your maps are being used. And so, I had a chance to chat with Will and to kind of dig into what we see as sort of some of those key success factors that's sort of really driven Sparkgeo over the years. And one of the, I think the big lessons here that kind of really got Sparkgeo started was this identifying this trend around mapping moving from being a desktop activity to being a web-based activity. And he really committed to that trend and really ran with it. So to the extent that you're thinking about your own business, what are those trends that are affecting your industry, and commit to them, really run with them. Maybe you'll be wrong and fail, but if you don't commit, you're almost certainly going to fail. Another big part of this for us and is this real, we have a very strong culture around curiosity. When we're doing our hiring, that's one of the big things that we look for in people is this a curious person? What are they doing in their spare time? With sort of other activities they do that demonstrate this curiosity, that they want to explore problems, they like finding solutions. And so that's a major part of the culture. And to the extent that within your own business, again, as an entrepreneur, you're trying to solve novel problems. If you want to do that, you have to be really curious about those problems. So, and you need a team that is also equally curious. The third lesson here that I really quite loved is this, listen hard and give a shit. So one thing I really liked about this lesson is around competition. Right. a lot of us can identify some big business, some huge organization with billions of dollars at their disposal that we have to compete with in our products. And you might ask yourself, like, how do I compete with Microsoft? How do I compete with whatever? How do you compete with these organizations? And the answer is you listen hard and you give a shit, because a lot of these organizations, they don't listen. They think they have the answers and they will tell you what the solution is. Whereas as a startup, as a young business, you need to listen to what your clients need and what they want, and you have to deliver on that. And so many large businesses don't. And so many of them don't really care. They're just fine without your business. They will carry on. They'll worry about their big accounts. As a small organization, as a small startup business, you're in a much better position to care about your clients because you are so much closer to them. And so that can be a huge competitive advantage, especially when for us in more service-based sector. I spelled that wrong. My fourth point there was on customer networks, not custom, versus your competitor networks. So it's so important to, again, if you're going to trade shows, you're going to events, go to the events where your customers are at. Prioritize those over, going to the trade show that your competitors are going to be at. Yeah, you need to kind of know what's going on with the competition, but it's so much more important to know what's going on with your customers. And that can be a major driver of your business. Certainly it still is for us. A lot of our business comes through those referrals and comes through those networks. Next one here is on minding your limits. This was an interesting lesson that he talked about, where somebody had asked him once why you don't do the 20% time that Google does, where you give everybody, 20% of their day to just kind of invent whatever they want. And the response there was, well, we're a service company. Like, we bill people by the hour. That's something that works for a product company where your revenue isn't based off of time as much, but for us it is. And so while we like to think of ourselves as a very innovation-oriented company like Google, we have a different business model than they do. They're a product, we're a service. And being mindful of that difference is really important. So what works for them doesn't necessarily always work for us. But you also need to understand how that changes with time. So, when we started out, it's very much focused on, we're doing this particular project and that's all we're doing. But as we've grown, we take on more R&D type projects, more internal development that's more long reaching now, because we have the resources and the capabilities to kind of do that. So, when you're starting that business, you have certain limits that you need to work in that work for you, but those limits change with time, and you just kind of need to be mindful of that and be mindful how they change over time. And then the last point I kind of wanted to draw on was this idea of people are more important than cogs. So, for Sparkgeo, we work in this environment of innovation, problem solving. We want people to be curious. And this kind of ties into point 3, that if you create a work environment where people are just cogs in a machine, they're not going to be creatives, right? And so we spend a lot of time putting structures in place that try and make people feel more like actual people than just a number. So a couple of things we do, we have regular lunch and learns. We sponsor, lots of events. We have internal sort of what we call guilds, which have different sort of discipline focuses, where we meet every week to sort of have presentations and discussions around this discipline for people to share those ideas. And we try and have this very flat structure where people feel like people and not just a cog in a machine. And that helps drive that curiosity. It helps, make sure that, yes, our people actually do really care about the problems they're trying to solve. So those were the key lessons I've learned about having a successful consultancy in a high-tech environment. So, and with that is the end of my presentation about geospatial and Sparkgeo.
Thanks so much for sharing, Jesse. Sounds like a great culture at Sparkgeo. So your team is, sorry, maybe you said it at the beginning, but I was multitasking. Your team is Prince George, a few in Calgary, a few in Toronto.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's primarily based out of Prince George, BC, and I want to say maybe a third of our staff. We are a fully remote company. Like there is no real office. So it's there's a good chunk of people that live in Prince George. Several people kind of live on the island, Vancouver area. Got a few of us here in Calgary now. And then there's, a few people in Toronto.
Cool.
And we have an office in the UK. So we've been adding, I want to say about 4 or 5 people there now as well.
Oh, wow. Okay, interesting. So the world goes to hybrid. Peter, do you want to unmute? Peter has a question. He's DM'd me. You can just ask it.
Hi, Jesse. Thanks so much for your presentation. I'm going to bring in Prince George tomorrow, by the way. That's weird. But anyway, what are the primary GIS platforms that you use, and are any of the big ones in Canada?
So, I suppose I'll preface that by saying we are not really a GIS company per se. And we've actually kind of deliberately avoided being a GIS company. But the biggest one is Esri, who makes ArcMap and ArcGIS, and they've got a variety of products under their umbrella. The other major one is there's an open source version called QGIS, Q as in the letter. That's very popular. It's very well supported. Great open source platform there. And there's a couple other products. There's Grass that falls under that also kind of follows from that. Those would be the 2 big GIS sort of products.
Thank you.
Who else has questions? I do, Mike says. Go ahead and unmute, Mike.
Hey, I wasn't sure what the protocol was or who I was supposed to ask.
You were.
Yeah, great presentation, Jesse. I have a question for you. You mentioned sort of understanding your limits. Is there anything that's inspiring you to, break through your limit challenges, or anything that you're learning that's helping you grow to have a little bit more confidence to solve some bigger problems?
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, because just focusing on what your limits are is, rather limiting. And so I guess where we sort of try and grow from that is, we have a strong commitment to open source development. So, a lot of our team, and especially a lot of our people are really engaged in the open source community, and that provides an avenue in which people are constantly growing and developing their skills and constantly creating new connections in a broader community. Kind of maybe at a more of an organizational level, we talk a lot about weak signals and trying to, that was part of what inspired us having guilds, was this, to provide this mechanism within the organization that people could bring forth these sort of weak signals that we're hearing about, and that we could then go out and explore more, and trying to build, business development strategies around how might we do that. So we're actually working with a couple of companies that are doing the whole metaverse thing right now, and trying to think about how does geospatial apply within this notion of the metaverse, and what does that mean to us? And so we do kind of look for a lot of those types of projects that seem to be kind of outliers in our space, and just understanding where we can bring value to those particular situations.
Cool. Thanks for sharing.
Looks like we have another question from Tej, is it? What trends are you seeing in the geospatial world? I'm curious as a professional in the same industry.
Yeah, so some of the big trends for us right now, as I mentioned, the incorporation of AI, machine learning, and that being a more popular tool set to use. There's a lot of work that we're doing internally right now around making, I throw this component of like spatial, right? So like where something is, but it's becoming increasingly more important to also include time as part of that. It needs to be 4-dimensional data of not only where things are, but when things are. So there's a lot of work going around that sort of 4-dimensional component of geospatial data. There's a really interesting work happening around ESG and sort of how our data and technologies apply to just the broader financial community, and particularly around ESG and sustainable finance, climate change, and all those fun things.
Awesome. So now we're going to head into breakout rooms because we are running short on time. So Alicia has a question in the chat. Maybe you can answer just in the chat there, Jesse. And then as well, if you want to think over the next 15 or so while we do breakouts, what is an ask you could make to our community, how we can help in any way with your work with geospatial. So we'll come back to that. I'm going to open the breakout rooms. We'll try to fit in at least 2 here. And
yes.
so
See, I have a question in the chat as well, if you can address. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. So I'll create the rooms here and you can all head in and we'll see you back in about 5-6 minutes. Okay, now I'm totally off track. Welcome back, and we'll head into community announcements. A quick one from us at Rainforest is that, yes, we are slow, but the scorecard report for 2021, though not that distant a memory for us, is going to be released very shortly. We're still working on it. It'll be a very thorough report, though, for everyone to make use of. That's from our side. We'll see you next week, either in person or on the Zoom call at the Platform Innovation Center, and I'll turn it over to anyone else with announcements.
I'll just say thank you for working on that report. I know you were like, oh, we're slow. And you know what? I think you guys are doing great. And, you know, those are big, important reports. Like, I get it. I've done things like that when I used to be with the railway. So give yourself a pat on the back because they're a large undertaking. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
And don't worry about us. We're here.
I agree. I agree with Alan.
Thank you all so much. It is because we have so many different people helping us this time, which is great to have subject matter experts, which is just a coordination of schedules more than anything. But yeah, that's life, hey? Thank you, Alan. Ross has an announcement. I've seen you posting about it, Ross, so please share.
This is more of an ask of the community, actually. I'm urgently looking for some digital web accessibility testing. I've got some online learning modules that I'm working on with my new job, and we are needing an external company to come in and do some auditing and review and provide us feedback on improving those. And we want to be able to meet the web content accessibility guidelines, the 2.0 version. So if anyone has any references or companies that could help out with that, urgently looking to hopefully get a quote and scope some of the work out by Friday.
Oh yeah, rush. Okay, hopefully someone can help. You threw that in Slack, right, Ross?
Yeah, it was already in Slack earlier today. I've dropped my email in the chat, and if you know anything, feel free to reach out to me.
Great.
One charity. We're doing a June 18th bike tour around Lake Invermere, and we're raising money for the Branch Out Foundation. You probably heard about it before. I'm going to head up the team, and we're looking for maybe 20 riders, maybe 25 riders that want to join us. We're going to call ourselves the Rainforest Energy Woodchucks, unless somebody can come up with a better name for us. And yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. It's a party in the evening. There might be a little bit of beer and a lot of great stories about mind health and non-pharmaceutical neurological research. So hopefully you can join us.
If I had a motorcycle, Pete, I'd be there in a second.
I have a wagon for you and I'll pull you, Al.
Yeah.
I thought we were talking about pedal bikes. We were talking about motorbikes?
No, pedal bikes.
Okay, pedal bikes. Okay, I'm curious about living in Invermere. If anyone lives, or not like vacations there, but lives there, I want to know about the lifestyle of life in Invermere. Okay, anyway, David, go ahead.
jfans.com. It's an app, show your true colors. I'm trying to make it go viral.
Did you put it in the chat, David?
I think I mentioned it. It's
okay.
way up there somewhere.
Okay, I'll dig it up in there. Awesome. Okay, cool. What's the distance Alicia wants to know, Peter?
100 kilometers or 160 if you want to finish off with a rip up to Panorama and back down again.
At the end when you're tired, just rip down the hill. That sounds fun. Okay, any other announcements?
And by the way, if you don't make it, we have buses to pick you up and take you to the beer stand directly. So don't worry about it. It's a fun thing.
And if you need a bike, although I think the bike swap's after that, but
I got 10 bikes in the garage. I can lend you one.
Well, you better bring those to the bike swap that Laura's hosting. That's in the Slack channel. If you're not in our Rainforest Slack, you gain access after you sign the social contract. Please look in your junk mail for the onboarding email, as it tends to go there after signing up. But if you've signed the contract and you still aren't on the Slack, just contact Amber and I and we'll help you get on. So on that note, have a wonderful rest of the week and look forward to seeing some of you in person next Wednesday. We'll leave the room open for a little bit here if people want to continue to connect.